Deep Dish Pizza is the story of Chicago.
Pizza's a matter of pride in Chicago.
Blue collar, broad-shouldered, hearty Midwestern stock.
You know, we have that Midwestern sensibility.
But as much as we love the deep dish pie, very few know its tawdry history.
Rick Ricardo starts it.
I contend Rudy Malnati did.
For while deep dish is the story of Chicago, the story of deep dish is uniquely its own. From recipe disputes
There's really no conflict. My father had the recipe for the pizza.
to poaching cooks
They actually hide outside of Pizzeria Uno and they wait for Alice Mae Redmond.
to straight up stab you in the backery.
And Ike Sewell said, "You're not a partner."
I'm sure that they made promises to her.
My father-in-law didn't think he was going to make it.
So grab a slice of the deep stuff. We're about to weave a tale that'll have you rethinking a true Chicago original.
We invented it, we perfected it, and it belongs to Chicago.
Chicago's Best presents Piece of the Pie, the scandalous history of deep dish pizza. Chicago's Best presents Piece of the Pie is brought to you by your Chicagoland Chrysler Group dealers.
The story of what we call deep dish pizza starts because of a restaurateur, artist, merchant seaman, adagio dancer, you name it, he did it, known as Rick Ricardo.
Chicago cultural historian Tim Samuelson, about to drop some knowledge.
He lived in a post-Chicago fire residence at the corner of Wabash and Ohio. But in the basement of this old house was a bar, and it was a rough place. The feds bust the bar, and so he takes over the old bar and makes this pizza that is very different from the traditional kind of pizza. Had Ricardo not created this pizza, the history of pizza would be entirely different.
But thank the pizza gods he did, and thus concludes our telling of the history of deep dish pizza.
Well, so as far as deep dish goes,
Huh? Jonathan Porter from Chicago Pizza Tours with some alternative facts.
back in the 40s, a couple of partners got together on the near north side of Chicago at the corner of Ohio and Wabash. One was a guy named Ike Sewell, who was a former football player at the University of Texas, an All-American offensive lineman, and then his buddy, a guy named Richard Neveretti, who was affectionately known as Rick Ricardo. Now, Ike being from Texas, he felt that Chicago didn't have any good Mexican food.
Ike decided that what Chicago needed was a Mexican restaurant.
Penny Pollock, dining editor at Chicago Magazine.
So Rick enlists one of the guys who works in his kitchen, and Rick Ricardo, who had never tasted Mexican food in his life, got sick, totally hated it, and ended up disappearing from Chicago for 2 months.
Bet you're gonna tell me he went to Italy and was dazzled by the Neapolitan style.
Said, listen, I've spent time in Italy. They got this stuff called pizza over there. It's gonna be dynamite here in Chicago.
Nailed it!
So the two of them are looking at each other like, all right, pizza it is. There's only one problem with that, and this happens a lot. You know, neither of them had any idea how to make pizza.
Excuse me, what?
I am totally mystified about stories that say that Rick Ricardo had no culinary experience.
Oh, it's on now.
He had an artist sensibility and kind of a creativity and almost an irreverence, but he also had a food background.
Rick showed Ike versions of what he had had in Italy, and Ike Sewell, being a big, brawny Texan, said, oh, I need something much more hefty, and maybe we need a knife and fork. So they kept building the pizza to be bigger and thicker and brawnier, and that's how deep dish was born.
But, like, let's just imagine they couldn't cook. Fill us in, John.
So what they do is they had to go out and find themselves a nice Italian guy by the name of Rudy Malnati Sr., an Italian immigrant.
Malnati, you say?
Now, up until then, pizza had been relatively small. Thin crust, more of an appetizer or a snack as opposed to like a full-blown meal. And Ike being from Texas, he felt that wasn't good enough. So through his direction, Rudy Malnati Sr. helped create the deep dish pizza.
I'm probably the only person that knows the real story other than my mother.
Rudy Malnati Jr.
There's really no conflict. My father had the recipe for the pizza. Rick had the building, which was 29 East Ohio, where obviously Pizzeria Uno sits now. And Ike Sewell was brought in for basically what he could do with bringing liquor to the restaurants.
So, on one side we have the Ricardo camp. It must have been Rick.
Rick Ricardo starts it.
On the other is the Malnati folks. Who better than an Italian immigrant? Am I right?
I contend Rudy Malnati did, and then you can just start to add up the stories between what you hear over here and what you hear here. It starts to come together and give you an idea of what may have happened.
Does it though? What say we go to the source?
Okay, sure.
April Gavin from the Pizzeria Uno.
The stance of our history is shrouded in mystery because Ike wasn't a journaler, neither was Novaretti, so we don't really know what they were thinking or exactly those conversations. What we do know is that Novaretti was an Italian guy. He made food for a living. He had an Italian dough recipe. It turns out though that Riccardo Novaretti died before any other deep dish pizza place in the city, including our second restaurant, Pizzeria Due, was open. So it sort of became Ike's legacy.
So what's the verdict? Last word, Penny.
People are greedy. Is that terrible?
No, not if it's the truth.
I find every version of this plausible because everybody wants the credit and everyone wants their name on it and everybody wants the fortune attached to it.
Still to come, the Malnati family gets their due.
My dad left Pizzeria Uno in Due in 1970, and when he did that, he had design on, being the Ray Kroc of pizza.
But first, a competitor arrives on the scene.
Nobody knows why they decided to get on the pizza bandwagon because they know nothing about pizza.
Don't go anywhere. When last we left you, it was Rick Ricardo that created the deep dish pie. Or was it Rudy Malnati? In any case, Pizzeria Uno was flourishing and their success had attracted some competition.
So in 1966, you got a couple of cab drivers named Fred Bartoli and Sam Levine, and they're sick of driving cabs for a living in rush hour traffic. They get the idea, this deep dish pizza seems to be catching on here in Chicago. It's going to be a thing for years to come. Problem is, again, they have no idea how to make deep dish pizza.
The way the pizza was made at Pizzeria Uno was always considered kind of a secret. When there was a new establishment in Geno's East, well, Pizzeria Uno lost their master pizza maker, Alice May Redmond.
Oh, it's getting juicy again.
In the restaurant business in general, taking people from one restaurant to the next is a pretty common thing to do.
Jordan Himmel from Geno's East.
And I think that they were able to sort of explain to her that this was an important thing and that she needed to come with them to start this new offshoot of deep dish pizza.
When you put it that way, Jordan, it almost sounds like a noble pursuit.
A couple of guys named Fred Bartoli and Sam Levine hide outside of Pizzeria Uno and they wait for Alice May Redmond, who was like the head chef there at the time. They find her, basically make her an offer that she couldn't refuse, and then bring her on board to Geno's East Pizzeria.
The plot thickens.
I'm sure it was money.
Deborah Frank, also from Geno's East.
I'm sure it was pay. I'm sure that they made promises to her so that she would come over and help them build their own empire, which they did.
Putting all that poaching business aside, sounds like it might have been a win for both Alice May and Geno's East.
People know the name of Sam Levine and Fred Bartoli really well because they were the owners, right? And Alice May, she never thought she was going to leave Pizzeria Uno to begin with, but then to be given this chance to put her spin on it, make this pizza the way she wanted to make it, and employ her whole family there, it was a great opportunity for her.
Lovely thought, John. Meanwhile, back at Uno, trouble was a-brewing between some longtime employees. Tim Samuelson catches us up.
Rudy Malnati Sr. was the manager of Pizzeria Uno in Due for a long time. And he also had a son who had worked for Ricardo and had worked as a bartender, and that is Lou Malnati.
Familiar name. I think I heard of the guy.
Lou and Senior worked for years at Uno's and Douay's and in many ways ran the place. Lou believed that he had some rights to the restaurant and wanted to know what would happen when Ike Sewell passed away. And Ike Sewell said, "Nothing. You're not a partner."
Cold, Ike. Very cold.
So he's about 40 years old or so. He's been there about 22 years at this point. So, he did a little bit of soul searching, decided to leave, and in 1971, on St. Patrick's Day, he decided to open up Lou Malnati's in Lincolnwood, which is a predominantly Jewish neighborhood.
It was an Italian restaurant in a Jewish neighborhood, and it happened to be on an Irish holiday, St. Patrick's Day.
Lou's son, Mark.
The first day at lunch, right through this wall behind me, came a Cadillac sedan DeVille and broke a girl's arm who was sitting in this booth having her first pizza at Malnati's. It was a wild day.
But all was not rosy in the Malnati family.
Well, I think when Lou left Pizzeria Uno, he thought to himself, yeah, it's in my rearview mirror. I'm not thinking anything about this anymore. I'm moving on. What's interesting to me is that Lou didn't bring his father, Rudy Malnati Sr., with him to Lou Malnati's.
My father-in-law didn't think he was going to make it.
Lou's wife, Jean Malnati Miller.
We opened and people were standing outside waiting to get in. And from that day on, it was up for grabs.
And the public continued to eat it up. Pun intended.
I think the way it goes is people grow up in a neighborhood and they grow up eating a certain kind of pizza, whether it's, Uno or Gino or, one of the others. And as their palate becomes a little more sophisticated, they seem to all work their way to the place where they're eating Malnati's. I can't explain it.
When we return, we're checking in with some of the little guys.
He said, "Rudy, you shouldn't be claiming this." And I said, "Aaron, do what you got to do. This is my father's recipe."
But don't worry, for they may be small, but their pizza is huge.
And when he told my mother she'll never make it, that's when she decided no matter what she had to do, she was going to make it.
Let's recap, friends. Deep dish pizza was invented by some combination of Rick Ricardo, Ike Sewell, and Rudy Malnati Sr. at Pizzeria Uno. Two cabbies, Sam Levine and Fred Bartoli, started up the first competing joint, Gino's East, and stole head cook Alice Mae Redmond for good measure. A bit later on, Lou Malnati, son of the aforementioned Rudy Malnati Sr., departed Uno for his own spot in the suburbs, Lou Malnati's. And those are the joints that put deep dish pizza on the international culinary map. But as Chicagoans, we know there's more to this pie than meets the eye. It's time we check in with some of your favorites that branched off from the big three. First up, we're headed to the South Side.
The newspaper said having a baby at 60, and this was my mom's baby.
Louisa's Pizza and Pasta in South Suburban Crestwood.
Louisa's is one of the classic kind of descendants.
The legacy of Pizzeria Uno just continues to live on. So many people that came through their kitchen, and one of them is a woman named Luisa De Janeiro.
Luisa De Janeiro was a longtime waitress at Pizzeria Uno and Douay and had a close personal relationship with both Rudy Sr. and Lou Malnati. Here's her daughter, Linda Fitzgerald.
She loved her job. She loved Rudy and Lou Malnati like forever.
But with Lou branching off on his own, Louisa thought it was finally time.
All her life, all she ever wanted to do was have a restaurant. And she used to ride up and down Cicero Avenue coming home from work, and she saw a little sign out here one day said, "For sale." She called me, she goes, "Linda, I think this is the place I'm gonna open." And she was 60 years old.
But age was no obstacle for a perfectionist like Louisa.
From my perspective, when she opened this place, it was about having things her way.
Louisa's grandson, Ed Fitzgerald.
A lot of times I'd hear my grandma say there might be the wrong way, the right way, another guy's way, but here it's my way.
And they remain that way because of a request Louisa made in her final hours.
On her deathbed, she was at my house and she told me, "Linda, you gotta keep this place going. Just keep everything the way I've done it."
My grandma used to say it was her baby. She loved it, she nurtured it, and she made sure she trained me, my sister and brother, and her daughter to make sure we nurtured it the way it was supposed to be.
Our next branch off the deep dish family tree comes from one of its originators.
Rudy Malnati Jr., he's the son of the great Rudy Malnati Sr.
We checked in with Rudy Jr. earlier in the program, but now it's his turn to leave a mark on the deep dish landscape.
So another Malnati also worked at Pizzeria Uno and both Pizzeria Due, and that would be Rudy Malnati Jr. It's not till decades later that his mom, Donna Marie Malnati, basically hits him upside the back of the head, says, hey, what are you doing? You got this great name, you know how to make pizza. Why are you wasting this away when you could be doing great pizza here in Chicago?
So Rudy Jr. opened the first Paisano's Pizza and Pasta on State Street, just north of the famous water tower.
I always wanted to obviously carry my family's name and my father's name forward.
Again, Rudy Malnati Jr.
On the back of our menu it says the real history of deep dish pizza. Aaron Spencer, who bought the recipe from Ike Sewell, called me into his office and he said, Rudy, you should be claiming this. I said, Aaron, do what you gotta do because this is my father's recipe. I've always kept the same ingredients that was done at Pizzeria Uno and Dewey. I always have kept my mother, who is 90 now, always made the dough.
Hold up, did he just say his 90-year-old mother made the dough?
So when Rudy Malnati opens up Paisano's on State Street in 1991, there's only a couple of people that know the recipe. Obviously himself, who came up with it, and then his restaurant jobber, a guy named Caesar, who he entrusted with the recipe. And then the third person that knows the recipe there is his mother, Donna Marie Malnati.
Deep dish, it has to be handled so carefully. Who else better to handle it than her?
And it's pretty clear that Rudy Jr. and Donna Marie's hard work has paid off.
You don't see a lot of deep dish pizzas out there that are handled correctly. If you do, you'll see that we'll feed between 12 and 1,400 people on a Friday night. So I think it speaks for itself as one of the best deep dishes in the city.
The final link between the big guys and the neighborhood joints is a newbie with yet another family connection to an original pie.
There is a family legacy, and it's interesting how pizza goes through generations. You can see that in the Malnatis, and you can also see that in the Bartolis.
When Gino's founders sold out, they were out of the pizza business. And then years later, and I mean years, comes along a grandson.
Brian Tondrick, grandson of Fred Bertoli from Gino's East.
I was in the restaurant quite a bit as a child, running around, playing with my cousins. We had so much fun there, and that's one of the things that got me into wanting to do pizza.
But it took a midlife career change to make that dream a reality.
I was in sales for 17 years, and I just got tired of it. I've always wanted to do something and follow my grandfather's path, so I basically took some family recipes, started working on them, redeveloped it into my own recipe, made hundreds of pizzas for my friends. I was bringing them to the bars, letting everybody try it, and they're all like, you got this down, you gotta open up a restaurant now.
And so in 2013, Brian opened Bartoli's Pizzeria, an homage to his grandfather in the North Side Roscoe Village neighborhood.
If my grandfather could see Bartoli's today, I think he'd be super proud of me. A lot of people come to Chicago, they want to try deep dish pizza, and they find us on the internet as being one of the highest rated deep dish pizzerias in Chicago. So they'll make special trips to come here. Most of them really like it, so that's, it keeps me going every day, and that's what I thrive on, is making people happy and letting them try what I think is one of the best pizzas in Chicago.
When we return, we're sitting down with the family for a nice big slice of deep dish love. It's time to check back in with all the folks you've seen tonight and find out why they love the original deep dish pie. By now, we all know that we'll probably never know the true story of deep dish pizza. What we can say for sure is that every Chicagoan has their favorite.
In Chicago, where you eat pizza is a family tradition. It's as important as which baseball team you root for. It's as important that you are a Bears fan.
Pizza's a matter of pride in Chicago. It's something when people talk about, they're adamant about what they love. They love a certain pizza, they're loyal to it, and I think that's just been bred into Chicagoans for generations after generations.
But is there a best?
To dispute like the recipe or who's better, I think it's that they're all different. Putting them up against each other, none of them are going to taste the same.
I never think of it as any kind of a rivalry or one better than the other. They all can stand on their own as something really good.
I think that all cities just like to have their badge of honor. I don't know why deep dish caught on. I don't know why eating big, thick pizza with a knife and fork caught on. But once it caught on, we were never letting it go.
In other words, Chicagoans aren't going to let a little friendly competition dampen the civic pride we all feel for a good deep dish pie.
Deep dish pizza is a meal to be enjoyed by, 3, 4, 5, 20 people. It's something to be able to share the same food out of the same pan. Families love to do that. And no town is more about families than Chicago.
Our whole thing has always been in Chicago, you have to really eat our pizza with a knife and a fork, and it's really a meal. You can only really eat 2 slices, and it's true. It is a meal.
Not too often do you get to go to a restaurant and you're sort of forced to sit at your table for a minimum of 45 minutes before you get your food, right? So it's forcing people to sit down, take a minute, socialize, enjoy the time that they have together, and then enjoy a tremendous meal.
And that's why deep dish pizza is the story of Chicago. It represents us. It represents family. And by God, it's got one hell of a story.
We invented it, we perfected it, we spread the word, and it belongs to Chicago. And that's it. End of story.
Chicago's Best presents Piece of the Pie was brought to you by your Chicagoland Chrysler Group dealers.